As they loaded the van, I thought to myself, that's it. I could pose as a pilot. I could travel all over the world for free. So the next day I placed a phone call to the executive corporate offices of Pan Am. I remember distinctly when the phone was ringing, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. When they answered, Pan American Airlines, good morning, can I help you? Yes, ma'am. I'd like to speak to somebody in the purchasing department. Purchasing? One moment. And the clerk came on and said, yes, sir, ma'am, can you help me? My name is John Black. I'm a co-pilot with the company based out of San Francisco. Been with the company about 7 years, but never had anything like this come up before. Oh, what's the problem? Well, we flew a trip in here yesterday. We're going out later today. Yesterday I sent my uniform out through the hotel to have it dry cleaned. Now the hotel and the cleaner say they can't find it. Yeah, I'm with the flight in about 4 hours. New uniform. Don't you have a spare uniform? Certainly. Back home in San Francisco, but I'd never get it here in time for my flight. Do you understand this will cost you the price of a uniform, not the company? Well, I understand. Hold on, I'll be right back. When he was all done, I said, how much do I owe you? Well, the uniform's $286. I spent most of the morning walking around LaGuardia in the uniform, trying to figure out now that I had this uniform, how the hell do you get on these planes? I got a little hungry, so about lunchtime, I walked in the luncheonette in the terminal, sat down at the counter on the stool, and ordered a sandwich. Moments later, a TWA crew walked in. The flight attendant sat in the booth, but the pilot's up at the counter on either side of me, and captain right next to me. Now, back before deregulation of the airlines, airline people thought of themselves as just one big family. So they didn't hesitate a moment to talk to each other, and the captain kind of leaned over. So tell me, young man, what type of equipment are you on? Now, airline people have a lot of jargon for things, and one of them is they never call a plane or an aircraft. They call it equipment, and what type of equipment you're on, and what type of plane do you fly? Back then, the DC-8 at 707. Of course, I didn't know that, and I thought, type of equipment am I on? The equipment I'm on is this stool. They must mean what type of equipment is on the planes I fly. So I thought, well, they got the wings, they got the engine. They always had a sticker on the engine, who manufactured the engine. So I said, yeah, it's General Electric. All three pilots kind of just stopped eating and leaned over. And the captain said, oh, really? What do you fly, washing machine? So I knew I said the wrong thing. Out the door I went.
Some people were so genius they managed to fool everyone. Like Frank, who was just a regular teenager from New York. He didn't have a job, a degree, or money. He led a normal lifestyle just like you and me. But one day, everything changed. His parents got divorced, which made him feel like his whole world was crashing down. With no one to guide him, he had to figure out life on his own. That's when he found out he had a special talent. He could talk to people and make them believe anything he said. Frank came up with a sneaky plan. He learned how to change checks to make it look like he had lots of money. But even though the checks were fake, the banks believed him. Suddenly, he was fucking rich. He stayed in fancy hotels, wore expensive suits, and ate in top-class restaurants, all while still being a teenager. But Frank wanted more than just money. He wanted to be someone important. So he had a crazy idea. What if I pretended to be a pilot? That way, he could fly anywhere in the world for free. Frank bought an old pilot uniform from a thrift shop and made a fake ID badge. He used his charming personality and smart talk to sneak onto airplanes. At just 17 years old, he flew on more than 250 flights across 26 countries without ever being caught. The airline even paid for his stays in fancy hotels. Everyone thought he was a real pilot. Comparing him to me when I was 17 is giving me a headache. But he didn't stop there. When he was in Georgia, he tricked a hospital into thinking he was a children's doctor. He even got a job as the boss of real doctors and nurses. He made sure to never treat patients himself. If someone asked for help, he would say, let's ask the nurse for her opinion. Somehow, no one ever doubted him. Later, as if being a fake doctor wasn't enough, Frank decided to become a fucking lawyer. He just casually made a fake Harvard law diploma and tricked his way into working at a law office. Some people say he even passed the bar exam by cheating. His boss thought he was one of the smartest lawyers he'd ever met. By the time he was 20, the police from all over the world were after him. But catching Frank wasn't easy. He was always one step ahead. Once, when the police were flying him back to the US, Frank escaped by crawling into the plane's belly from the restroom. Another time, he walked out of a high-security prison while wearing a guard's uniform. It seemed like no one could stop him, but even the most genius tricksters get caught. At 21, Frank was finally arrested in France. He was sent to prison, but not for long. The FBI was amazed by how smart he was and offered him a deal. If he helped them catch other scammers, they would let him go free. Frank agreed, and this time, he used his genius for good. He became one of the world's best experts on stopping scams and helped banks and police catch bad guys like the person he used to be. Today, he's respected for turning his wild past into something good. His life inspired the movie Catch Me If You Can. But this was only the first out of 11 genius scammers that I will show you today. At the end, you'll be shocked by how far some people will go to outsmart the system, and you might even end up using some of their tricks yourself, which I don't recommend. However, our next scammer did something even wilder. He didn't just trick people with fake papers. He actually sold something that no one could ever really own. Imagine it's the year 1925 in Paris. The Eiffel Tower, which is famous today, wasn't very popular back then. It was old, rusty, and very expensive to fix. Some people even thought it was ugly and wanted it gone. Newspapers wrote stories saying the government might tear it down. This gave Victor Lustig an idea. He was a genius that could talk his way out of anything. He wasn't just good at lying. He was amazing at it. He decided he was going to sell the Eiffel Tower, even though it wasn't his to sell. Victor knew he had to be very smart about his trick. He wrote fake papers that made him look like a very important government official. He even gave himself a fancy job title, Deputy Director of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. He made sure the papers looked so real that even a police officer might believe them. Then he booked a fancy room at a famous hotel in Paris. From there, he sent letters to 5 big scrap metal dealers, asking them to come to a secret business meeting. In the letters, he wrote that the Eiffel Tower was going to be taken down and sold for scrap metal, but the public couldn't know about it yet. When the scrap metal dealers came to the fancy hotel, they saw Victor dressed in a very nice suit, acting like a serious boss. He spoke politely but firmly, saying that the Eiffel Tower was too old and too expensive to keep. The government, he said, had decided to sell it for scrap metal. To make the story even more real, he arranged a private tour of the Eiffel Tower. The dealers could see the rusty metal, worn-out beams, and busy workers doing repairs. Everything looked just as Victor had said. One of the scrap metal dealers was a man named André Poisson. He was new in the business and wanted to make a big deal that would make him famous and rich. But Poisson's wife was very smart. She didn't trust Victor and told her husband to be careful. Victor guessed this might happen, so he made another clever move. He secretly met with Poisson and pretended to be worried about his own job. He hinted that he might need a little extra money to make sure Poisson won the deal. This made Poisson believe that Victor was a real government worker, since only someone important would ask for a secret bribe. Poisson handed over a huge amount of money, not just for the Eiffel Tower, but also for the secret bribe. The deal was done, or so Poisson thought. As soon as Victor got the money, he disappeared overnight. By the time Poisson realized he'd been tricked, Victor was long gone. Poisson was so embarrassed that he didn't even tell the police. But Victor wasn't done. A few months later, he came back to Paris and tried the same trick again with another group of scrap metal dealers. This time though, one of them got suspicious and told the police. Victor barely escaped and fled the country before they could catch him. Victor's trick was about making people believe a story that seemed real. He understood that people get excited when they think they're getting a secret special deal. He knew exactly how to act, what to say, and how to dress to make people trust him. He fooled the world by selling the Eiffel Tower, but our next scammer played a different kind of trick. She didn't sell buildings or fake treasures. She sold a dream. Elizabeth Holmes promised to change the world with her invention, but what she delivered was one of the biggest lies in history. She wasn't just a regular person with a big idea. She was like a superstar in the business world. Everyone thought she was smart, successful, and ready to change the world. In the early 2000s, she started a company called Theranos. The idea was amazing. A small machine that could do hundreds of health tests using just one tiny drop of blood. No more big needles, waiting for days, or paying lots of money for lab tests. It sounded like magic. And Elizabeth promised it was real. Elizabeth's dream came from her own fears. As a kid, she hated needles and was super scared of them. She thought, what if there's a way to test blood without pain? Even when she was in high school, she told people she wanted to invent amazing things and become super rich. Her parents believed in her big dreams and always encouraged her. At just 19 years old, Elizabeth quit Stanford University after only 2 years. She told everyone she didn't need college because she was ready to change the world. She used the money her parents saved for her school to start Theranos. Soon, she created her first invention, a device that could deliver medicine through the skin. This was just the start of her journey to mix science and technology. Elizabeth made herself part of the story. She wanted people to see her as super smart and serious. She copied her hero, Steve Jobs, by wearing black turtlenecks and keeping a straight, serious face. She even lowered her voice to sound powerful.
Right, to be able to get access to information about themselves And their own bodies.
Everything she did was carefully planned to make people trust her. She told everyone that her invention, a box-like machine called Edison, could do hundreds of health tests with just one finger prick. It would make blood tests fast, cheap, and easy for everyone. People believed her and gave her lots of money. Over $700 million. Her company was worth $9 billion. And at only 30 years old, she became the youngest self-made billionaire with a fortune of $4.5 billion. She was famous. Magazines like Forbes and Fortune called her the next Steve Jobs. She spoke at big events, went on TV, and became a symbol of hope for women in business. She made people think if she can do it, anyone can. But there was one big problem. The technology didn't work. Inside the company, the Edison machines were a mess. They couldn't do the test right and often broke down. Some tests gave wrong results, which was very dangerous for patients. Instead of telling the truth, Elizabeth and her team made a terrible choice. They lied. When patients sent their blood to Theranos, the company secretly used regular lab machines from other companies to do the tests. But they told everyone it was their own invention doing the work. Elizabeth didn't let anyone question her. If an employee doubted the machines, they were fired or forced to stay quiet. Some were even threatened with lawsuits. The office became a scary place, and workers were always nervous. But Elizabeth kept smiling, acting confident, and making big promises. She even got super powerful people to join her team, like former US Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. They trusted her without really understanding the technology. She also made deals with big stores like Walgreens and Safeway, saying they would put her machines everywhere. Even when doctors and reporters asked tough questions, Elizabeth called them haters and said they didn't believe in new ideas. She was so good at talking that many people didn't think she could be lying. But in 2015, a reporter named John Carreyrou from the Wall Street Journal started investigating. After talking to former workers and looking into the company, he wrote a shocking article. Theranos was a fraud. The Edison machines didn't work. Patients got wrong results that could have hurt or even killed them. Elizabeth had lied to investors, stores, and the public. The news spread fast. People felt betrayed. Investors pulled their money. Lawsuits started, and Theranos shut down. Elizabeth went from a superstar to a criminal in court. In 2018, she was charged with fraud for tricking people into believing her lies. Her perfect image crumbled. The woman everyone believed in became a symbol of greed and dishonesty. In the end, she broke people's trust and left a mess behind. Her rise and fall remind that even the biggest dreams need to be honest, or they can hurt a lot of people. She used charm and deception to build an empire on lies. But what happens when those same tools are used not just for power, but for destruction? Let me introduce you to Sante Kimes and her son, Kenneth, a mother-son duo whose crimes went beyond scams and straight into the chilling world of manipulation, cruelty, and even murder. Sante Kimes was a very tricky and clever woman. She was born in Oklahoma in 1934 and didn't have much money growing up. But even as a little girl, she dreamed of living a rich and fancy life. The problem was, she didn't want to follow the rules to get there. By the time she grew up, Sante had learned how to trick people to get what she wanted. Sante's biggest skill was how smooth she could talk to people. She was so charming that she could make anyone trust her. Then, when they believed her, she would lie and steal from them. This is called a scam, and it became her way of living. But Sante wasn't just lying to survive. She wanted big things, fancy houses, expensive cars, and lots of money. Rules didn't matter to her. If she saw something she wanted, she'd find a way to take it. And when she had a son, Kenneth, she didn't teach him how to be a good person. Instead, she taught him to lie, steal, and cheat, just like her. Kenneth Kimes didn't have a normal childhood. Most kids learn how to ride bikes, play games, or make friends. Kenneth learned how to help his mom steal from people. To everyone else, Sante and Kenneth looked like a close mother and son. But in reality, their relationship was strange and dangerous. Kenneth wasn't just her son. He was her partner in crime. By the time Kenneth was a teenager, he was already helping his mom with her scams. The two of them became a team. They trusted no one but each other, and Kenneth would do anything his mom asked. Sante saw rules differently than most people. To her, they were like tiny barriers she could just step over, and she was very smart enough to trick people in big ways. She would pretend to be someone else, forge signatures, and create fake papers. One of her favorite scams was to move into rich houses by pretending to rent or buy them. Then, she would just stay there and refuse to leave. Sante loved feeling powerful. She didn't just want money, she wanted control. Once, she pretended to be a wealthy lady and moved into a huge mansion in Beverly Hills. She and Kenneth lived there for free, acting like they were rich, until they disappeared before anyone could catch them. Kenneth didn't just follow along. He was learning everything his mom taught him. Sante showed him how to write write fake checks, make fake IDs, and scare people who tried to stop them. Together, they were unstoppable. She used her charm, and he used his strength. But not everything went perfectly. Their scams started to fall apart, and instead of stopping, they made things worse. One of their cruelest scams was tricking immigrants, people from other countries who needed work. Sante and Kenneth would promise them jobs, take away their passports, and then force them to work without pay. It was terrible. For years, Sante and Kenneth kept getting away with their tricks, but Sante was never satisfied. She didn't just want money, she wanted millions. And that greed led them to their worst crime of all. In 1998, Sante and Kenneth set their sights on a woman named Irene Silverman. Irene was 82 years old and lived in a huge fancy mansion in New York City. She used to be a dancer and has spent her life building her fortune. To Sante, Irene wasn't just a nice lady, she was the perfect target. Sante and Kenneth came up with a plan. They pretended to be a rich mother and son named Eva and Manny. Using fake names, they rented an apartment in Irene's mansion. At first, they were polite and friendly, trying to gain Irene's trust. But Irene was smart. She noticed that Kenneth acted strange and refused to show her any ID. She started to suspect something was wrong and decided to kick them out. For most people, that would be the end of the scam. But for Sante and Kenneth, it was just the beginning of something much worse. They decided to make Irene disappear forever. On July 5th, 1998, Irene vanished. Nobody saw her leave, and there were no signs of a fight. Her staff realized something was wrong when she didn't come to breakfast. The police started looking for her, but it was like she had disappeared into thin air. What nobody knew at the time was that Sante and Kenneth had likely killed Irene. Her body was never found, so no one knows exactly what happened. But police found some scary clues. Among Sante and Kenneth's belongings, they discovered a to-do list. It had notes like drug the old lady and make her sign papers. It was clear this crime had been planned. After Irene disappeared, Sante and Kenneth started forging her signature on checks and tried to steal her mansion. But this time, their plan fell apart. The police were already onto them. Just days after Irene went missing, the police stopped Sante and Kenneth in New Jersey. Their car was full of fake IDs, forged papers, and documents belonging to Irene. The cops quickly connected the dots. When detectives dug deeper, they uncovered years of crime, fraud, lies, and even stories of enslaved workers. They also linked the pair to another mysterious death in the Bahamas. Sante and Kenneth had left a trail of victims everywhere they went. During the trial, witnesses explained how Sante used her charm to trick people and how Kenneth carried out her plans no matter how awful. The most shocking evidence was their to-do list, showing they had planned every step of Irene's disappearance. The jury didn't need much convincing. Sante and Kenneth were both sentenced to life in prison. For Kenneth, it was a sad ending. He had spent his entire life under his mom's control, never learning to make his own choices. Sante had ruined her son's life, as well as the lives of her victims. It's hard to believe a mother and son could work together to do so many terrible things. They proved that scams can be as twisted as they are terrifying. But not all cons involve murder and stolen mansions. Some rely on love, or at least the illusion of it. Meet Simon Leviev, better known as the Tinder Swindler. His weapon of choice wasn't violence. It was charm and dating apps. He didn't look like an ordinary person on Tinder. His profile showed him as a rich, exciting man. He said he was the famous son of a diamond businessman. In his pictures, he was flying in private jets, wearing fancy clothes, and staying in super expensive hotels. Everything about him looked perfect, like a prince from a fairy tale. But Simon was not who he said he was. His real name was Shimon Hayut, and he wasn't rich at all. He was a man from Israel who had spent years tricking people. Even when he was a teenager, Simon was already lying and cheating to get what he wanted. By the time he was grown up, he had become very good at fooling people. Tinder became the place where he could meet lots of women from all over the world, and he used it to trick them. Simon's plan was clever. First, he matched with women on Tinder, and then he worked hard to make them like him. When they went on dates, they weren't normal dates like going to a park or a coffee shop. Simon would take them on private jets or to fancy restaurants. He gave them expensive gifts and said sweet things, calling them his soulmate. He wanted them to believe they were in a fairy tale and that he truly loved them. Simon also listened carefully. He asked the women about their lives, their dreams, and their problems. He made them think he cared about them deeply, but all of this was part of his trick. He was only pretending to love them so they would trust him completely. After Simon had their trust, he started his real scam. One day, he would send a message saying he was in trouble. I have enemies, he'd tell them. He would make up a story about how the diamond business was dangerous and how his life was at risk. He would say his bank accounts were frozen, so he couldn't get any money. Then, he'd ask for their help. Could they send him some money to keep him safe? He promised he'd pay them back soon, even giving extra money as a thank you. At first, Simon would only ask for a little money, maybe a few $1,000s. But then, he'd ask for more and more. Some women gave him so much money that they had to borrow from the bank or sell their things. They thought they were helping the man they loved, but they didn't know the truth. The money wasn't for Simon's safety. It was paying for his next fancy trip or his next expensive suit. He was using the money to impress more women and trick them too. Simon did this again and again. Each time, he moved on to a new woman when one ran out of money. Over the years, Simon tricked many women in different countries. One woman gave him $250,000 because she believed his lies. When she found out the truth, she was heartbroken and went to the police. That's when she discovered she wasn't the only one Simon had tricked. In 2019, Simon was caught by the police in Greece. He was sent to Israel, where he was sentenced to 15 months in prison. But shockingly, he only stayed in jail for 5 months before being let out for good behavior. This made the women he tricked very angry because they wanted justice. Even after getting out of jail, Simon didn't stop acting like he was rich. He posted pictures on social media with fancy cars and watches, still pretending to be wealthy. He said he had done nothing wrong and even started trying to make himself famous. Today, Simon Leviev is known all over the world as a reminder that some people are very good at pretending to be kind and loving, but even the nicest looking people can be hiding the biggest lies. He was a master at playing pretend, using charm and fake promises to take money from people who trusted him. But George C. Parker took trickery to a whole new level. He didn't just fool a few people, he sold some of the most famous landmarks in the world. Once upon a time, there was a man who loved to play tricks on people, but his tricks weren't like simple pranks. He did something much bigger. He convinced people that they could buy famous places, like the Brooklyn Bridge. George lived in New York City a long time ago in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Back then, lots of people were moving to the city from other countries. These people, called immigrants, didn't know much about how things worked in America. They came to New York with big dreams and hopes of finding success. George saw this as his chance to fool them. The Brooklyn Bridge, which was finished in 1883, was one of the most famous things in New York. It was big, beautiful, and very important because it connected two parts of the city. George pretended he owned the bridge and told people he could sell it to them. He would say, if you buy this bridge, you can charge people money to cross it, and you'll become rich. To make his story sound true, George carried around fake papers that looked real. He had fake deeds and official-looking stamps to prove he owned the bridge. He would talk to people in a very friendly and convincing way, and many believed him. Some people were so excited about their new bridge that they started building toll booths on it to charge others money. But soon, the police came and told them, you can't do that. The Brooklyn Bridge belongs to the city. That's when they realized they had been tricked. But the Brooklyn Bridge wasn't the only thing George sold. He also pretended to sell the Statue of Liberty, a huge statue that welcomes people to New York. He told people they could make lots of money by turning it into a tourist spot. He even tried to sell Madison Square Garden and Grant's Tomb, both very famous places. George was so good at tricking people because he understood their dreams. If someone wanted to get rich quickly, he promised them a way. If someone wanted to own something important, he made it seem possible. He played with their hopes and made them believe his lies. For many years, George kept tricking people. He was caught and arrested several times, but he always managed to get out of trouble. People couldn't believe how bold he was. Most con men try to keep their scams small so no one would notice, but George went for the biggest targets he could find. Finally, in 1928, George's luck ran out. He was caught again, and this time sent to jail for the rest of his life. He went to Sing Sing prison, where he stayed until he passed away. Even in jail, people talked about how daring his tricks were. Today, when someone says selling the Brooklyn Bridge, it means trying to pull off a crazy scam that no one should believe. He fooled people into buying things no one could own. But while Parker tricked individuals, Jho Low played a much bigger game. He didn't just con people, he took billions of dollars, throwing parties with celebrities and living the life of a king. Imagine living like a billionaire every day. Flying in your own private plane, sailing on a giant yacht, throwing fancy parties with famous people like Leonardo DiCaprio, and owning huge mansions in the most beautiful cities in the world. Now imagine paying for all of that by stealing billions of dollars that were supposed to help your country. It sounds like a made-up movie, doesn't it? But this is the true story of Jho Low, the man behind one of the biggest money thefts in history, called the 1MDB scandal. Jho Low was born in 1981 in Malaysia. His family wasn't super rich, but they had enough money to live comfortably. Jho was smart, charming, and good at talking to people. Even when he was young, He loved making friends with important and rich people. When Jho went to study at a fancy school called the Wharton School in America, he didn't just learn from books. He also spent his time meeting people from wealthy families in places like the Middle East, China, and Asia. He wasn't just making friends for fun, he was planning how to use those connections later. Jho wanted more than just money. He wanted to live like a superstar. He saw an opportunity in something called 1MDB. This was a big money fund created by Malaysia's government to help the country. The plan was to use the money to build things like schools, hospitals, and roads to make life better for everyone. Jho got close to Malaysia's prime minister, a man named Najib Razak. Jho told Najib he could help make 1MDB famous and successful by bringing in investments from around the world. Even though Jho didn't officially work for the government, Najib trusted him and let him get involved. Instead of using the 1MDB money to help Malaysia, Jho secretly started stealing it. He moved billions of dollars into his own bank accounts by using fake companies and tricky documents. What did Jho do with all that money? He spent it on an unbelievable lifestyle. He threw huge parties in places like Las Vegas and New York City, where famous actors and models came to celebrate with him. He bought one of the world's biggest yachts called Equanimity, with a swimming pool, a movie theater, and even a place for a helicopter to land. Jho also bought mansions in Beverly Hills, New York, and London. He gave Leonardo DiCaprio a $3.2 million painting by Picasso as a gift. He even used the stolen money to help make a famous movie called The Wolf of Wall Street, which was about greed and stealing, just like Jho's real life. Jho was clever about staying hidden. He didn't show off his money publicly like many rich people. He dressed simply, avoided taking the spotlight, and let other people get the attention. But behind the scenes, he was living a double life, using the money he stole from the people of Malaysia to fund his luxurious lifestyle. After years of hiding his theft, reporters and investigators started noticing strange things about the 1MDB fund. Billions of dollars were missing, and the clues pointed to Jho Low. The scandal became a global problem, with countries like the United States, Switzerland, and Singapore joining the investigation. By the time they figured out what had happened, Jho had stolen over $4.5 billion, a number so big it's hard to imagine. When people found out about his crimes, Jho disappeared. He became one of the most wanted fugitives in the world. People think he's hiding in countries like China or Thailand, using fake names and spending his stolen money to avoid getting caught. Despite many efforts to arrest him, Jho Low is still free today. The 1MDB scandal didn't just hurt Malaysia's government, it hurt the people. The money that was supposed to improve their lives was gone, spent on Jho's parties, yachts, and mansions. People were angry and felt betrayed. Some of the stolen money has been found and returned, but not all of it. Najib Razak, the prime minister who trusted Jho, was also found guilty of corruption and sent to prison. But now let's talk about someone who didn't steal money. She went after shiny jewels instead. Doris Payne became famous for her clever tricks and big smile, walking out of stores with diamonds hidden in her bag. A long time ago in 1930, a little girl named Doris Payne was born in a small poor town in West Virginia. Doris didn't have much growing up. Her family was very poor, and life was hard. She was a black girl living in a place where people weren't always kind to her because of her skin color. But Doris was clever, and she had a special talent. She could charm anyone with her warm smile and friendly words. Doris didn't want to stay poor forever. She dreamed of a better life, one where she could wear fancy clothes, live in beautiful places, and never have to worry about money. She watched her mom work so hard, and she promised herself she would find a way to make her dreams come true. One day, when Doris was a teenager, something happened that changed her life. She went into a jewelry store to try on an expensive watch. The store clerk got busy and forgot Doris was wearing it. Doris could have reminded him, but instead, she walked out with the watch still on her wrist. Nobody stopped her, and that gave her an idea. What if I could trick people and take what I want? Doris didn't start out stealing big things. She took her time, learning how to fool people. She came up with a plan that she called the game. Here's how it worked. Doris would dress up in beautiful clothes and pretend to be a rich woman. She would go into a fancy jewelry store and smile kindly at the workers. Doris was so friendly that people trusted her right away. Once everyone felt comfortable, Doris would ask to see lots of expensive jewelry, rings, necklaces, and bracelets. While the workers were busy showing her things, Doris would secretly slip one small but very valuable piece into her handbag. Then she'd thank them, say she needed time to decide, and leave the store as calmly as possible. Doris was very good at staying calm, even when something went wrong. If someone started to suspect her, she'd just smile and say something funny to make them forget their doubts. Doris knew that if she acted like nothing was wrong, most people wouldn't question her. Doris didn't just steal from 1 or 2 stores. She traveled to famous cities all over the world: Paris, Tokyo, New York, and even Monte Carlo, where rich people loved to visit. She became so good at the game that she stole diamonds worth thousands of dollars. One of her most daring tricks happened in Monte Carlo. Doris walked into a very fancy jewelry store and pretended to be a wealthy customer. She smiled, chatted, and admired a sparkling diamond worth $500,000. The workers believed she was a serious buyer, but by the time they realized the diamond was missing, Doris was already on a plane to another country. What made Doris even more amazing was that she wasn't hiding in the shadows. She looked and acted like a movie star. She wore elegant clothes, carried herself with confidence, and even talked to reporters about her adventures. For Doris, stealing wasn't just about the money. She loved the excitement and the challenge of outsmarting people who underestimated her. Even the smartest people make mistakes, and Doris wasn't always lucky. Over the years, she was caught and arrested many times, but even when she went to court, she never gave up. Doris would represent herself, which means she didn't hire a lawyer. She spoke to the judges and juries with so much charm and confidence that they often believed her side of the story. Sometimes, Doris would say that there wasn't enough proof to convict her. Other times, she'd claim she was being treated unfairly because of who she was. And believe it or not, these arguments often worked. Doris avoided spending a lot of time in jail for most of her life. But Doris couldn't stop playing the game. Even when she was in her 80s, older than most grandmas, she was still stealing jewelry. One day, she was caught taking a diamond ring from a store. People couldn't believe she was still at it. But Doris just smiled. By then, Doris had become famous. People wrote books about her, made documentaries, and even created a movie based on her life. She became a legend, not just for her crimes, but for her personality and the way she lived life on her own terms. Doris Payne wasn't just a jewel thief. She was a storyteller, a trickster, and someone who lived her life with daring and confidence. Even though stealing is wrong, people couldn't help but be fascinated by her cleverness and bravery. But what if someone didn't just steal money or jewelry, but stole people's lives? Imagine pretending to be missing kids, tricking families, and making them believe you are their lost child. It sounds impossible, but one man did it again and again and got away with it for years. Frederick Bourdin, called the Chameleon, didn't always plan to trick people. He was born in 1974 in a town in France. When he was little, his dad left the family, and his mom had a hard time taking care of him. Frederick often felt like no one noticed him or cared about him, and this made him feel very sad. As a boy, Frederick realized he could copy people really well. He could talk like them, act like them, and even pretend to feel the same way they did. This made him feel special, but instead of using this skill to make friends, Frederick started using it to pretend to be people he wasn't. When Frederick became a teenager, he didn't want to be himself anymore. He started making up new identities, new names, and new lives. Sometimes he lied to stay out of trouble, and other times he lied because it made him feel like a different person. Over time, Frederick got really good at pretending. He didn't just say he was someone else. He acted like them completely. He could learn a new language, create fake papers, and even change how he behaved so no one would doubt him. Frederick was very clever. He could act like a shy, scared kid or a confident, talkative teenager. He knew how to make people feel sorry for him, and they often believed whatever he said. Frederick wasn't just good at disguises for how he looked. He also disguised his feelings and thoughts to trick people. The most shocking trick Frederick ever pulled happened in 1997. At the time, he was in Spain pretending to be a lost teenager. When police asked him who he was, Frederick lied and said he was Nicholas Barkley, a 16-year-old boy from Texas who had disappeared 3 years earlier. This was a big, bold lie because Frederick didn't even look like Nicholas. Nicholas had blonde hair and blue eyes, but Frederick had dark hair and brown eyes. Still, Frederick didn't let that stop him. He dyed his blonde hair, made up a story about his eyes changing color because of something bad that happened, and started talking with a fake Texas accent. When Nicholas's family heard the news, they were so happy to think their son had been found. Frederick knew they wanted to believe this so much, so he acted like a quiet, sad boy who had gone through something terrible. The family believed him, and they took him into their home. Frederick lived as Nicholas for months. He went to school, met Nicholas's old friends, and even convinced police officers who had been working on the case. He was so good at pretending that most people didn't notice anything was wrong. Even though Frederick was really good at lying, he couldn't keep it up forever. A private investigator hired to check into the case started noticing things that didn't make sense. How could Nicholas forget so much about his life? And why did he now speak with a French accent when he had lived in Texas? Eventually, the truth came out. A DNA test proved that Frederick wasn't Nicholas. When people asked Frederick why he did it, he didn't try to deny it. He admitted everything. He also revealed that he had pretended to be not just Nicholas, but hundreds of other people before. Frederick said he lied because he felt lonely and unloved. Pretending to be someone else made him feel like he belonged, even if it wasn't real. But for the families he tricked, his lies caused a lot of pain. Even after Frederick was caught and went to jail, he didn't stop. When he got out, he started lying again. In one case, he pretended to be a teenage orphan in France and even went back to school, fooling students, teachers, and social workers. Frederick kept running away from who he really was, but it didn't make him happy. Each time he became someone new, it only made him feel lonelier. No matter how many lies he told, Frederick couldn't find peace. Frederick's tricks left a lot of people sad and confused. For Nicholas Barclay's family, it was especially hard. They thought they had their son back, only to find out it was a lie. This made them feel the pain of losing Nicholas all over again. Frederick's story also made people ask big questions. How could so many people, like teachers, police, and grieving families, be fooled? The answer is that Frederick knew how to play with their feelings. He understood that people wanted to believe in happy endings, and he used that to trick them. Frederick Bourdin's story is both sad and amazing. He didn't hurt anyone physically, but the emotional pain he caused was very real. Some people see his story as a look into how far someone can go to escape their own pain. Others see it as a warning about how easily people can be tricked when they want to believe something is true. But what if someone became a famous soccer player without even knowing how to play? No skills, no practice, just really smart lie. Meet a man who tricked everyone, lived like a sports star, and got rich, all without kicking a ball. Imagine a boy in 1960s Brazil running around with no shoes and kicking a ball made of socks on a dusty street. That boy was Carlos Henrique Raposo, also known as Carlos Kaiser. He grew up in Rio de Janeiro, where soccer wasn't just a game, it was like magic. All the kids wanted to be like Pelé, the biggest soccer star in the world. They dreamed of becoming famous and rich by playing soccer. Carlos had that dream too. But there was one problem. Carlos wasn't good at soccer. Instead of playing better, Carlos found out he was good at something else. Talking. He could make anyone believe him. He decided that he didn't need to actually play soccer. He just needed to make people think he was a great player. His big plan started in the 1970s. Back then, coaches didn't have video recordings or the internet to check if a player was good. They relied on what they saw and heard. Carlos tricked a small team into signing him by showing them fake letters and pictures of himself with famous players. He looked like a star, so they believed him. Carlos's tricks were very clever. First, he made sure he looked the part. He stayed in shape and practiced fancy moves to impress people. Then, when it was time to play, he would pretend to be hurt. He would say things like, "My leg hurts," or "I pulled a muscle." These were hard to prove back then, so no one could tell he was lying. Carlos didn't stop with one team. He moved from team to team, always pretending to be a great player. He tricked big clubs like Botafogo and Flamengo in Brazil, and even teams in other countries. Reporters wrote stories about him, and fans thought he was a star. Carlos even paid people to pretend to cheer for him at games. They would shout his name and clap, making him look like a hero. Sometimes, Carlos almost got caught. One time, a coach asked him to play in a practice game. Carlos knew he couldn't play without being discovered, so he caused a big scene. He pretended to fight with a fan and got himself kicked out of the game. This gave him an excuse to stay off the field. As Carlos kept fooling teams, his tricks got even bigger. He joined a French team in 1986, where people expected more from him. Carlos used the fact that he didn't speak French to make up stories about how great he was. He even translated newspaper articles about other players and claimed they were about him. For over 10 years, Carlos played more than 10 teams. But here's the crazy part. He only played a few minutes in one real game. He became famous not for playing soccer, but for avoiding it. People called him a ghost because he was part of the soccer world, but he never really showed up on the field. Years later, Carlos told the truth about what he did. He laughed and said, "I wanted to live like a soccer star, but I didn't want to play soccer." He said he didn't hurt anyone because the teams had plenty of money, and real players were still getting chances. But now, what if someone told you they were part of one of the richest, most powerful families in the world? You'd probably believe them if they seemed confident, smart, and acted the part, right? That's exactly what a man named Clark Rockefeller did. But in reality, Clark Rockefeller wasn't his real name. He wasn't even close to being a Rockefeller. His real name was Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, and he was just a regular guy from a small town in Germany. Growing up, he was a pretty average kid, but deep down, he dreamed big. When he was 17, he moved to the United States, and And that's when everything changed. He realized something important. In America, people loved a good story. If you could act the part, people would believe almost anything. At first, Christian tried small tricks. He told people he was a foreign student working on a big movie in Hollywood. Then he claimed he was a rich traveler who had just moved to the US. But these lies weren't enough. Christian wanted to be someone important, someone people admired. And then an idea hit him. What if I pretend to be part of the Rockefeller family? The Rockefellers are one of the most famous families in America. They're super rich and super powerful, and their name alone makes people stop and listen. Christian knew that if he could pull this off, doors would open for him everywhere. Christian changed everything about himself to become Clark Rockefeller. He spoke with a fancy accent, wore expensive clothes, and acted like he owned the world. He told people he was an art collector, a businessman, and a member of the Rockefeller family. When people asked questions, he'd shrug it off, saying, "Oh, my family prefers to stay private." And you know what? People believed him. Clark quickly made friends with rich and important people. He got into fancy clubs, was invited to private parties, and became a regular face in the most exclusive circles. Everyone wanted to be around him because they thought he was a Rockefeller. Clark didn't just fool strangers, he even fooled the woman he married. In 1995, he met Sandra Boss, a super smart and successful woman who worked as a business consultant. Sandra made millions of dollars, but she didn't mind that Clark didn't seem to work that much. And after all, he was a Rockefeller. Why would he need a job? Clark controlled every part of their life. He said he didn't need to share bank accounts because his family money would take care of them. Sandra trusted him completely, and they stayed married for over a decade. But even though Clark seemed perfect on the outside, little things didn't add up. He refused to show her his ID or let her meet any of his family members. But Sandra ignored these red flags because, well, he was Clark Rockefeller. Who would lie about that? Clark didn't just lie about being rich. He used his fake identity to scam people out of real money. He sold fake artwork, borrowed money he never repaid, and got access to private clubs and benefits just by using the Rockefeller name. He didn't even have real paperwork to prove who he was. No real ID, no social security number, nothing. His entire life was like a magic trick. What people saw was only an illusion. Clark's perfect life started falling apart after Sandra began to suspect the truth. In 2006, they got divorced, but that wasn't the end of Clark's lies. He refused to let go of the control he had. In 2008, during a supervised visit with their young daughter, Clark kidnapped her and disappeared. This move was a huge mistake. Suddenly, the FBI got involved. A nationwide search began, and it wasn't long before they found him hiding in Baltimore. When they arrested him, Clark's real identity was revealed. He wasn't Clark Rockefeller. He wasn't even a little bit related to the Rockefellers. He was just Christian Karl Gerhardschreider, a man who had been lying for decades. In conclusion, these 11 scammers were crazy, surprising, and, let's be honest, kind of interesting. From people pretending to be athletes to fake doctors, they show you and me one thing. If someone is creative and brave, even the wildest ideas can sometimes work. Let's be real, half of these scams sound like they started as drunk ideas that just went way too far. And honestly, I'm fucking impressed. If there's one thing these scammers prove, it's that you can fool anyone. Except the IRS. So, good luck with that. And if you enjoyed this video, check out another one, When Arrogant Businesses Destroyed Themselves.